Welcome everybody to this final panel. So without further ado, Chris Williams.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Connell. And it's a great pleasure to come along and talk at this conference. It's a historical paper, so it's perhaps something of an outlier in the conference programme, but I hope it'll be of interest in terms of showing that perhaps some of the themes that we've been discussing have been integral to at least some of the radical thinking in the past. So my focus today is on the ideas and the wider legacy of the industrialist, philanthropist and utopian socialist Robert Owen. Just to give you a very brief biographical introduction, Owen was born into humble circumstances in mid-Wales in 1771. He left home when he was 10. He began working in the drapery trade in London, Lincolnshire, and then in Manchester, and then he moved over to first managing and then owning cotton mills, initially in Manchester, and then from 1800 he was master manager and owner of the New Lanark mills in Scotland. Over a period of 2 decades, he transformed them into one of the most enlightened and successful industrial enterprises in Europe. And the attention and fame that he got at New Lanark gave him the profile to spread his increasingly radical ideas about human nature and social change, both in the UK and in the US. From the beginning of the 1830s, he spent 15 years in a flurry of activity involved with the trade union movement, various community experiments, and with what became known as the Owenite movement, which had its own buildings, newspapers and branches. And he remained active until his death, also in Newtown in 1858. Assessing Owen's importance in the British context, Friedrich Engels wrote in 1882 that every social movement, every real advance on behalf of the workers links itself on to the name of Robert Owen. Now, his legacy is multiple and complex. The original test bed for many of his ideas, New Lanark, is a World Heritage Site. He's often seen as the father of the British cooperative movement. There was an Irish dimension to Owen's influence. He made a tour of Ireland in 1822, 1823, holding a number of public meetings in Dublin, giving testimony to the Select Committee investigating the employment of the Irish poor, and he inspired a community experiment instituted by John Scott van der Leur at Rallahine in County Clare in the 1830s. More recently, I've been involved, along with Professor Greg Cleese, probably the world's leading Owen scholar, in engaging with the Welsh government, which did an audit of the British Empire and the slave trade, in which Owen's name came up. But that's another paper. Today, I want to focus on Owen's ideas about civic and social space, particularly as he developed them in the 1810s and 1820s. That period wasn't one of pandemic, but it was one of very rapid, intense, and often traumatic industrial and social change. In 1815, as the Napoleonic Wars came to an end and were succeeded by a period of intense post-war economic depression and widespread poverty, Owen offered some observations on the effect of the manufacturing system, noting that in his own lifetime, Britain had changed from being essentially agricultural to a situation in which commerce had an importance which it never previously attained in any country possessing so much political power and influence. And although Owen said this generated an enormous national wealth, the general diffusion of manufactures throughout a country generates a new character in its inhabitants. And as this character is formed upon a principle quite unfavourable to individual or general happiness, it will produce the most lamentable and permanent evils. For Owen, working people were now in a state more wretched than could be imagined, in a situation infinitely more degraded and miserable than they were before the introduction of factories. Now, in part, Owen felt this was because their previously frequent opportunities of enjoying healthy, rational sports and amusements had disappeared, what with long working hours and concentration in insanitary factory towns. But although Owen, like many early socialist thinkers, idealised aspects of rural society, he didn't think it was either possible or desirable to return to the state of affairs that existed before industrialisation. Owen believed instead you had to combine the great advances in production that the Industrial Revolution had made possible with a new form of social organisation in which the needs of all human beings could be respected. And he campaigned for social change on many fronts. He was an advocate of reduced working hours, especially for child workers, and he pioneered primary education through his institution for the formation of character, a school for children between 5 and 12 years of age, which he opened at New Lanark in 1816. Now, the title of the school is, I think, significant because Owen has sometimes been accused of being a man of one idea, and certainly there's a sense in which all of his thought and his actions can be traced back to what he was often tempted to refer to as his great discovery, namely that environment determines character. Owen considered that an individual's attitudes and beliefs were dictated by the circumstances in which they grew and by the experiences they underwent. So constructive outcomes could be predicted if the environment was rearranged appropriately, if the education that children received was calculated to enhance their happiness and their social conscience, hence the naming of the school. For us today, that idea is pretty unremarkable. But in the early 19th century, in a world where religious beliefs predominated and often focused on concepts of original sin, it was potentially transformative. Furthermore, solutions to problems for Owen had to be communal, not individual. As he wrote in the first essay of A New View of Society, the happiness of self, clearly understood and uniformly practiced, can only be attained by conduct that must promote the happiness of the community. And running throughout Owen's adult life as a thread are his various attempts to construct the optimal conditions for community living. I'm just going to focus on his ideas here for the organisation of and the appreciation of the role of public and civic space in these communities. For Owen, it was vitally important to consider the impact on individual happiness and group dynamics of the physical space in which people lived. So to begin with New Lanark, this was a site that he inherited. There was already a mill there on the banks of the River Clyde, only slightly downstream from the beauty spot and place of sublime wonder, the Falls of Clyde, which itself attracted its fair share of romantic visitors following the conventional itinerary. For one scholar, Owen at New Lanark was constructing a social laboratory within a pleasure ground, already working with a potentially favourable environment. And Owen invested in building walkways and paths along the riverbanks and through the woods to enable the mill families to maximise the benefits of their immediate surroundings during their leisure hours. Owen believed that the conditions requisite for happiness included pure air, regular exercise, extensive real knowledge of ourselves, society and nature. He believed education was best taught not within the four walls of a bare building in which formality predominates and nature is outraged, but in the nursery, the playgrounds, the fields, the gardens, the workshops, manufactures, museums, and classrooms. And the Institution for the Formation of Character also offered a versatile space for public interaction. It doubled as both a primary school and as a venue for evening lectures and classes, for dancing and for musical concerts. And there's a sense in which Owen's experiences as mill owner and master manager at New Lanark set the pattern for so much of his highly ambitious later thinking. In his address on the opening of the school in 1816, he stated as a principle that any community may be arranged as not only to withdraw vice, poverty, and in a great degree misery from the world, but also to place every individual under circumstances in which he shall enjoy more permanent happiness than can be given to any individual under the principles which have hitherto regulated society. And Owen believed that what he'd achieved at New Lanark could be generalised to provide community-focused solutions to the industrial and social challenges Britain was facing. 18 months after the opening of the school, he was organising and publicising meetings in London for the further elaboration of his schemes. And these meetings, which took place in August 1817, are conventionally held to mark the shift from Owen as enlightened industrialist to Owen the utopian socialist. Central to Owen's recommendations were the creation of what he called villages of unity and mutual cooperation. And these would house between 500 and 1,500 people and would function along cooperative principles. Now, Owen somewhat sort of bonkers-like designed various combinations of religious and political beliefs. There's another sheet here, which I think makes the point really. Trying to create harmonious communities. This was his sort of plan. Now, he didn't see these as fixed combinations. Rather, he believed these arrangements would allow men more readily to understand their real situation in society and to, in a sense, understand how other people with different views could be tolerated and could share the same space. Ultimately, he saw all of these divisions being overcome. In addition to the internal social and political dynamics, Owen paid considerable attention to the physical design of these communities. Each was to be surrounded by land of around 1,000 to 1,500 acres. Each would be furnished with centrally located public buildings, including kitchens and canteens, schools, lecture rooms, places of worship, committee rooms, and libraries. There would be recreation grounds, liberally planted with trees. There would be gardens in which vegetables would be grown and where elder children would spend some time working. Adults would be employed in a mixture of agricultural and manufacturing work, combining productive labour with a maximum opportunity for healthy exercise. In his letter outlining these plans that was published in many London newspapers in advance of the public meetings in 1817, Owen set out the contrasts between the existing situation in manufacturing towns and what he hoped would be the case in these proposed villages. He wrote that in the manufacturing towns, the poor and working classes usually live in garrets, cellars, lanes, or courts, whereas in the proposed villages, they will live in dwellings formed into a large square, rendered in every way convenient and usefully ornamented. Whereas now they are surrounded with dirt, enveloped in smoke, and have seldom a pleasant object on which to fix their eye, in the future they will be surrounded by gardens, have abundance of space in all directions to keep the air healthy and pleasant. They will have walks and plantations before them within the square and well-cultivated grounds kept in good order around as far as the eye can reach. Whereas the manufacturing towns, wrote Owen, are the abode of poverty, vice, crime and misery, the proposed villages will ever be the abode of abundance, active intelligence, correct conduct and happiness. Now, Owen's plans generated considerable controversy. London radicals, and you see some of them pictured here in George Cruikshank's illustration, London radicals feared a paternalistic plot to turn the country into a nationwide system of workhouses. William Cobbett derided Owen's communities as parallelograms of paupers. We know that in public meetings held to advance his ideas, Owen exhibited large drawings, possibly a little bit like this, of these communities, but these were not always as persuasive as he might have hoped. The Examiner in 1819 suggested that Mr. Owen should get some plans sketched of his villages in a completer style than those he had printed. The squares, filled up as he designs them with trees and turf, would then never be mistaken for barracks. Later artists tended to make a better job of illustrating the happy communities that Owen's plans heralded. And such plans he developed further into the early 1820s. The size of the communities varied from 300 up to 2,000. In his report to the County of Lanark of 1820, Owen included the details that the sleeping apartments in the individual dwellings would overlook the gardens and the sitting rooms would look onto the central squares. When he spoke at the Rotunda in Dublin in 1823, Owen suggested that at a short distance from the gardens may be placed the workshops and manufactories, washing and drying houses, granaries and storerooms. With the aid of the embellishments which trees properly afford, the whole of this combination may be made to present an animated and cheerful scene of great rural beauty. Owen was never able to garner sufficient support for these plans to have them enacted on the scale anticipated, but he did return to develop their design at different points throughout the rest of his life. By the 1840s, he was suggesting that the new communities would be equipped with towers, which will also serve as observatories for astronomical, meteorological and other purposes, and which would include platforms for new coniophotic lights, line lights first used in Britain in the 1830s, which would brilliantly illuminate the squares at night. The communities would also be equipped with pleasure grounds, with botanical, horticultural and floricultural gardens, plots of land for experimental agriculture, the whole intersected with spacious gravel walks affording abundant space for cheerful outdoor exercise. Owen wrote that these communities would contain the advantages of a metropolis, a university, and a country residence, a bit like the campus here, without any of their disadvantages, and be situated within a beautiful park of 2,000 or 3,000 acres. Now, insofar as Owenite proposals for new communities were ever realised, this was through the form of Owenite settlements established in a variety of locations. In the centre there in Scotland in the 1820s, there was Orbiston, that pillar is all that's left. In the US, top right, there was New Harmony, which is still a kind of quirky settlement of its own. In Ireland in the early 1830s, Rallahine. In Wales in the 1840s, top left, top right, top left, bottom right, Pantglas and Garn Lloyd. And in England, Mania Fen, there's nothing left there now, in Cambridgeshire. And Queenwood in Hampshire as well. I'll come on to that in just a moment. Now, many of these communities, as you can see, were small in scale, based around existing farm buildings rather than starting from scratch. So they inevitably embodied compromises between what Owen and his followers aspired to and what they could deliver. New Harmony in Indiana, which Owen bought from the Rappist community that had first established it, was what Owen called the best halfway house I could procure. Perhaps the most ambitious venture was Queenwood, established from late 1839 onwards on a 533-acre site. Now, this building was never built, but you get some sense of the ambition. It was designed to house 700 people. By 1842, it did boast Harmony Hall, and here's a slightly later illustration. A large building with lavish fittings. It had a model kitchen with a conveyor to carry food and dishes to and from the dining room. As for the grounds, the walks were laid out at considerable cost, even before the land began to be properly cultivated. The Owenite socialist George Jacob Holyoake visited Queenwood and admitted he was surprised at the estate's extent. A day is insufficient to walk around it. Stretching far over hill, dale, and entangled woodland, I walked over that estate and its glorious undulations, through its broad expanse and woodland relief, and down its gorgeous yew tree avenue with its long aisles of vernal glory, colonnades of venerable firs, making a palace scene which no picture has exaggerated and no language done justice. But, noted Holyoake, his enjoyment of the aesthetic beauty of the estate was tempered by his knowledge that its rent was unpaid. Now, Owen's defence of this sort of luxurious provision was that the community was intended to be the standard for a superior socialist future where all would enjoy privileges currently only the wealthy monopolised. All the apartments in the building were to have central heating and air conditioning, in effect, hot and cold water and artificial light. But unfortunately, after spending over £40,000 on this, the estate went bankrupt and the community was dissolved in 1846, although the building lived on for about just over another half a century as a Quaker school devoted to experimental methods and the teaching of science. It actually burnt down in 1902, which is very unfortunate. Now, the failure of Queenwood brought to an end Owen's attempts to envisage and enact new forms of communal living that would prioritise shared public spaces. Looking back, it's not difficult to identify the problems and mistakes that confounded his good intentions. At New Lanark, he'd been in control of the rhythms of community life, largely able to institute change and see it carried through. We know that not all of his ideas were received favourably, either by the mill workers and their families or by his business partners, but the settlement carried, and to a considerable degree still does, the stamp of his personality. Later ventures were much harder to exercise control over, not least because Owen's preferred method of governance was far from democratic or consultative, and he also tended to lack an appetite for detail or for resolving conflicts. And these weaknesses, along with a range of other factors, undermined the larger scale settlements, such as New Harmony and Queenwood, while the smaller scale settlements were rarely in a position to do much more than scrape by as commercial entities, frequently in the face of local suspicion and hostility. Existing sources, unfortunately, tell us relatively little about how Owen's followers and Owenite community dwellers experienced life in these settlements, because they focus mostly on internal conflicts or on their struggles to keep their financial heads above water. Queenwood's setting, as I've mentioned, seems to have been a source of some wonder and admiration, but tempered by an awareness of the settlement's precarity. Yet what Robert Owen managed to do in imagining better ways for communities to live was to highlight not only the importance of an ideology in common, but also the value that would accrue to the community's self-esteem and sense of its own originality by being imaginatively conceived. The principle underpinning all his designs was the pursuit of, literally, harmony. Harmony between man and nature, between industry and agriculture, between the family unit and the wider community, between adults and children, between aesthetic appeal and functional utility. Such a series of balances, Owen believed, was within the grasp of men and women to achieve through the exercise of their powers of reasoning and through their commitment to a collective, peaceful and harmonious future. Owen was never able to realise success anywhere beyond New Lanark, but his quest for what he called a new moral world was worthy of respect and remains capable of providing inspiration. Thank you very much.
Hey, hi everybody. My name is Marcus Diaz. I'm assistant professor in the School of Communications in DCU. Today I'm going to be presenting one aspect of my research. I'm a vice chair of the Korea Media, Cities and Space section. So my research is at the intersection of media and urban studies. Last year I published my thesis as a book. And this book is about performance art and how performance art in urban space can help us to reflect on contemporary urban life. I did some ethnographic studies on performance art projects in urban space. So that would be sort of my main line of research, but also in the last 2 years, I have teamed up with Associate Professor Carol Barron. She's in the School of Nursing, and we have a common interest in urban space in general and well-being. So we're looking at how people, her particular focus is on children and adolescents, but we together we decided to examine, to investigate how parks were incredibly useful during COVID, particularly focused on Dublin. So we conducted a major survey on park users in Dublin with the assistance of the Dublin City Council. And this was we're looking at park users in all city councils around Dublin. And this was an online survey because this project started 2 years ago and we couldn't really go around interviewing people. What we wanted to see, what were the changing patterns of urban park usage in Dublin during the pandemic, and which were incredibly beneficial. We assumed, and we found out that it was, in fact. But also, how can we sustain these benefits, and what do people want from parks post-COVID? So this publication, this report, is available online. I made a smaller link there, but if you want me to share the links later, you can just email me. And if you want any more information too, you're more than welcome to email me. So in this presentation, I'm just going to give you an overview of what we found in the survey and some of the recommendations that we have based on the report. So this is a kind of an overview. We asked a few questions to all the participants to see if they agreed or disagreed. So this is, how many people agreed with all these statements. So I think the first one is quite significant. Dublin parks are a good use of taxpayers' money. Nearly everyone agrees with that. And they provide opportunities to see nature. They're places for children to play. They improve mental health. They're a place to relax and unwind. They're good for physical health. They're good for meeting other people. And interestingly, 86% said, yes, I want to use the park as frequently as I use it during the COVID pandemic. And then not so many people agreed. Perhaps, well, 3/4 still said my park is attractive and well maintained, but half don't agree that the parks are safe, which is quite an important point. And half did say that the park wasn't large enough. And this is an interesting one because during pandemic, I think, all our usage of urban space, our ability to move through urban space was curtailed significantly. And parks became these sort of oasis places where people could relax and wind, not be too worried that they would be, surrounded by too many people. And the other one is that the events in parks and activities are not well promoted. So we did find that out through the survey. We also, this was, a quantitative and a qualitative research, and so we have a wealth of data that we're still sifting through, and we intend to publish a few papers about it. But this is just 2 quotes to give a sense of what people are thinking about how parks were useful. So the first one is saying this is a great de-stressor. I prefer to walk in the park rather than on the roads. Very calming and relaxing. Lifts my mood. Reminds me that we're not all alone, even though I work alone most of the day. So there's some interesting patterns that happen, especially with people working from home. And then suddenly, the parks become incredibly more relevant during this period. So in terms of the survey, we got the responses from more than 2,000 respondents. Interestingly, 70% were female. We didn't get, I suppose, a balance that we wanted to get. But also, we wanted to get more children, more adolescents. Unfortunately, that it's really hard to get that for ethics reasons, but also because it's very hard to engage in this community. So that's something that we found really difficult. And perhaps, if we were to repeat the survey, we would try and find better ways. I don't know, TikTok or whatever you can, however you can get these people involved, because it's really important to hear everyone's opinion. 67% of them were married or living with a partner, and only 30% were single. So pre-COVID, so only 4% of the survey respondents said that they normally worked from home, irrespective of COVID-19. During COVID-19, pretty much half of the respondents were working from home. So this was quite significant. Pretty much everyone said that they had access to some sort of outdoor space for recreation. And that the majority that didn't, they were living in apartments. But also, perhaps if you look at the age breakdown, 25 to 44-year-olds, 10% said that they didn't have access to outdoor space for recreation, perhaps because more of that age cohort are living in apartments. So that's roughly a breakdown of where they lived. So 85% live in a house, which is when you think of other European cities, European capitals, perhaps the percentage of people living in apartments would be much higher. So it's an interesting aspect of Dublin. So the types of space used for recreation, obviously public park came at the top, but then back garden, front garden, because a lot of people live in houses in Dublin, communal green areas, and so on. And also another fact that we found is that most people use the park that is closest to them. But during COVID, and this is in the next slides, a lot of people decided to explore a little bit further or go to a different park. I want to see something different because, we were so bored during COVID that even like a different park sounds like a good proposition. And half of the participants said they use the same area of the park every visit. So it's kind of interesting, though. It's a very it's a kind of a 50-50, and other 50% said that they would use different areas. How did you get to the park? This was quite important for us in terms of sustainability and how do parks connect with transport. So 77% said they walked to the park, and this correlates with the fact that a lot of the respondents lived close to a park, close enough to walk. Those 60% drive to the park, and you think, okay, why do you have to drive to the park? And only 5% cycled, and only 0.1% used the public transport, which is, we thought that was quite astounding to think. In other cities, we would assume that more people would use public transport to go to the park. And I suppose Dublin has a certain advantage, and if you look at this 15-minute city movement that is, pretty much trending at the moment, Dublin is kind of doing pretty well because, a lot of people do live close to the parks. So one thing we found really interesting here is when you look at, we asked people how long does it take for you to walk to the park? So as you can see in the graphic there, a lot of people, if they were, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes walk from the park, they would definitely walk to the park. But if you look at the cycling and push scooter, it's kind of flat. Okay, so even 5 minutes, 30 minutes, it doesn't change that much. But when you look at the driving, then, so it means that people that are kind of 20 minutes or more walk from the park, they decide to drive rather than cycle or rather than get the public transport or scoot to the park. So we thought, this is something that really needs to be addressed. So since the pandemic started, and again, this was really interesting, nearly 3/4 said that they've decided to start visiting other parks. So this is a very positive development. In fact, that people are not restricting themselves to their local parks, but also using other parks. But one of the most interesting things was the frequency of visiting, or the days that people visited the park. So pre-COVID in blue there, as you can see, from Monday to Friday, it's pretty much quite fairly low. And then Saturday to Sunday, you have that nearly expected increase. But during COVID, and we're looking at the orange bars now, you can see that people use parks during the week as much as they use the parks on weekends, which indicates that people were perhaps working from home, and they were closer to their local park, and they would go during a lunch break or straight after work from home. So this was a very, very interesting aspect of that we found in research. The other thing, and I suppose this graphic is, if you crunch the numbers here, if you look closely at the numbers pre-COVID and during COVID, we found out that people in the 30 to approximately 2-hour range, people would spend more time in the park. So so people were spending in the range of kind of 1 to 2 hours. Few people were spending 2 hours or more, but there was certainly an increase there in the 1 to 2 hour range. So instead of spending just half an hour or an hour or less than half an hour, people were spending a little bit longer in the park. Reasons to go to visit the park. So the most simple reason, I want to get out of the house, because I think during COVID, everybody wanted to get out of the house. Walk in the park, improve my mental being. So the most interesting aspect here is that these are very simple things. It's one, you want to get in touch with nature, you want to walk, meet up with friends, enjoy a quiet space, and so on. Now, if I show you that list, if you were to guess, which of these would be the top 3 issues identified by participants, probably, if you want to guess, or if you want to guess at least the top reason, what would you say? Toilets? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so 42% said toilets. Yeah, well, no. the second reason was too crowded, but that's related to COVID. Nowadays, it doesn't matter that much. And the third reason was dog fouling. So the toilets, it has quite a significance because people are using the park more. So you need to have those facilities there. And a lot of the Dublin parks don't have toilets. But what we've seen post-COVID is that some parks started incorporating toilets, or some parks got new cafes, like the Albert College Park, which is beside DCU. They have the tram cafe, and their toilets there, they're not very well signposted. You need to know that they're there, but they're there, and no one's going to stop you from using them, even if you're not buying a coffee. But these came, and this is quite important. So if you want people to use the parks more, you need to have that infrastructure in place. So some of the key findings in our report. So definitely a steady increase of usage during working days, comparable to the weekend usage. A noticeable increase in the time spent in the parks during the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of kind of information about events and the parks themselves, a third were getting information from Facebook, some from the Dublin City Council website, some from Twitter, but nearly a third of respondents weren't using any of those platforms to find out about information about DCC parks, information about events. There is an issue here because different city councils manage different parks in Dublin, even if they're very close to each other. And then you have the OPW, which manages a series of other parks. So it's very hard for them to kind of talk together, and that is perhaps a missed opportunity there. So we came up with a few key recommendations that are in the report. Okay, so first is, recommend that local communities should be consulted in relation to requests for new activity facilities and resources. One thing we found out is that for example, the adult exercise equipments, those big metal yokes, they're not that popular. They weren't very popular with the respondents. And actually, from my own experience, my daughters love to use those because they're more attracted to them than the majority of adults. So I think we need to get the local communities involved in this consultation process. Another one, consideration should be given for public-private collaborations where the investment for such infrastructures is justified. So one of the examples, as I mentioned, the tram cafe in Albert College Park, is that, it's a sort of informal one, but we thought if there was a privately operated cafe that's allowed to operate in a park, they should be providing toilet facilities and looking after those facilities and maintaining them. That's actually a photo of the tram cafe. I don't know if any of you have been here. I've been to it. No, it's a lovely place. I highly recommend. It's a little oasis in the middle of Albert College Park there. Also, unnecessary barriers such as what's known as the kissing gates should be removed where possible to provide accessibility, and there's still a lot of those in place.
Or to stop bicycles and quad bikes.
Yeah. So it's a difficult one because in certain areas, I think that the residents would be accepting that they should be in place, but then that inflicts on accessibility for disabled users and so on. But if possible, we would recommend that they should be removed. Facilitate access to parks for public transportation and safe and accessible routes for cycling, scooting, and walking. Some of our participants of our survey mentioned that they use the park, they cross the park, to go from home to work and so on, and that they feel it's a much better proposition than going through a busy road, as Eleanor presented yesterday on her research in Glasgow. And address the most common issues mentioned, so through targeted strategy. So lack of toilets in parks, dog fouling, lack of catering facilities, and the safety, which I didn't delve too much here, but there is that aspect of some people not feeling safe in a park. And if you think about other European capitals, and perhaps it's the cultural thing, but people would use the park at night, for example, and here we don't have that culture. Is it a possibility that, we could incorporate that, but that would involve safety and a series of other factors there. A targeted and unified approach combined with increased effort to the promotion of park events and use through multiple communication channels. So this is a challenge again, because it's across different councils. How do you get the councils to work together on that approach? And creating the right conditions for informal and imaginative child-led play in Dublin's parks. And some parks have, I have to say, amazing playgrounds, but there are other opportunities or perhaps more natural approaches to play. And this is something that we found in our qualitative analysis. So thanks very much, and I'm open to any questions.
Well, my name is Ana Fernandes. I'm a Brazilian, like my colleague here. And I'm a postdoctoral researching here at TU Dublin at the School of Tourism and Hospitality Management. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on the Fast-Paced project. So this is a Harry-founded project on festivals, public space, and cultural inclusion, aiming to explore the role that festivals play in cities, how they shape the use of public space, and influence cultural inclusion. So this project involves 5 cities, as you can see: Glasgow, Dublin, here is the PI is Bernadette Queen, Gothenburg, Barcelona, and London. And it's coming to an end now, but we're still working on its data. So today we will present some findings from a particular work package where I investigate the whole of intangible cultural heritage in shaping public spaces and to foster cultural inclusion. So in this landscape, the role of public space is key for cultural inclusion of migrants, offering opportunities for different groups to engage with others and a chance to express themselves. So at this part 1, I organized this presentation, in 3 parts. And the part 1, it's an introduction about migrants, public spaces, and intangible cultural heritage. Then some research contests, and then the emerging findings. So to introduce, we can say that European cities have becoming more ethnically diverse in recent decades and facing common challenges today in trying to integrate migrant populations without fear of losing their cultural identity. According with the Central Statistics Office, in 2019, almost 3 million migrants entered the European Union from non-European Union countries. As places are not fixed, but always in a stage of becoming, are constructed through social cultural interactions. Migrants are important social actors who bring their own culture with them and have a relevant role in the reproduction of space and in the making of place. It is on the scale of place, identified by Henri Lefebvre as a lived space, that everyday life is manifested, where individuals establish relationships, create affective and social bonds, and develop sense of identity and belonging. Therefore, our current challenge is to develop public space in ways that foster integration, inclusivity, and diversity, where migrants could have the possibility to build a lived space outside their homeland. So one key approach to unleash these potentialities is through the celebration of their intangible cultural heritage, defined as oral traditions, performing arts, social practice, values, and our main focus, the festive events where they can celebrate their intangible cultural heritage. This heritage is part of a living culture. It is an essential element in maintaining identity in the face of globalization and immigration process. And it also fosters cultural inclusion, as it can contribute to social cohesion, encouraging a sense of identity, with help individuals to feel part of a community and a society, and then contributing to the production of more inclusive and culturally diverse space. So in the light of that, this introduction brings us to our research contest, and we know the COVID outbreak made the challenges of producing inclusive and culturally diverse public spaces even more difficult. So we already know that COVID outbreak has changed the world in so many ways, and the inability to hold physical festivities and to promote social gatherings, fostering many social special changes. Even with the sanitary guidelines and restrictions imposed by COVID, it was possible to notice some social gatherings in some of Dublin's public spaces. Therefore, many parks across European cities had been locked up to stop this kind of behavior, as you can see in this warning at Montreux Square. So here we have people playing soccer at Montreux Square during lockdown, in one of the lockdowns that we had. And the warning, we will have no option but to close Montreux Square Park if the social gatherings continue. So it became evident that space and social interactions and culture matter. So in this new landscape, parks and squares have been playing a main role in city recovery, as our colleague just presented here to us. And many responses emerging in this process, reinforcing the relevance of public spaces for the ordinary life and for the reproduction of the lived space. So during the city recovery, we identified new uses of some spaces from the expressions of Brazilian intangible cultural heritage, which have been bringing new dynamics for some spaces. So we spot up some cultural and well-being activities supported by Dublin City Council in partnership with other institutions like the capoeira and the Afro-Brazilian dance, and also the emergence of some grassroots responses like the forró dancing, a social dancing. The Brazilian community is one of the largest migrant communities here in Ireland. In 2019, there were over 27,000 valid residence permits for Brazilians here. And this population change has been introducing a new and diverse cultural landscape to the country, and people from different ethnic backgrounds are sharing common spaces. In the light of that, we aim to investigate in what ways cultural diversity is present in Dublin's public space, understand the influence of the Brazilian intangible cultural heritage in the reproduction of places, shaping the lived space, and in the city recovery post-COVID. This is an ongoing study so far developing from literature review, from a geographical approach of intangible cultural heritage and its role in the reproduction of space, social construction, social spatial identities, and a qualitative field research, a field work that we are conducting since March and April from 2021. And 10 in-depth semi-structured interviews with agents linked to the expression celebrations of Brazilian intangible cultural heritage in Dublin, like the Intercultural Development Coordinator of Dublin City Council in the Northeast Inner City, the Intercultural Ambassadors, the Brazilian community leaders, festivals managers, capoeira and forró dancing instructors, and other festivals organizers. We also conducted 40 short interviews with Brazilians forró dancing goers, people who attend the social dancing, and then we're developing a thematic analysis. So here I will present some of our emerging findings. One of the first initiatives identified involving capoeira was the Operation Reactivation, organized and supported by Dublin City Council. It was a 6-week program of activities to encourage the community to engage with outdoor public spaces. It was organized by Dublin City Council in partnership with the Five Lamps Arts Festival and with some of youth community centers in the area. The program offers weekly capoeira workshops and Afro-Brazilian dance classes aiming to bring social cultural integration and disseminate the Afro-Brazilian culture in the area. According with the organizers, this was an attempt to decrease conflicts between some Brazilians and some local long-term residents in the area that were already existing but were intensifying during the lockdown. The classes were delivered at Montreux Square, Liberty Park, and Sheriff Street in the Northeast Inner City, where immigrants comprise 52% of its population. So here a brief of what is capoeira. It's an Afro-Brazilian dancing. It's a fight and a dance, and it was widespread in Brazil by the enslaved Africans. And in 2014, UNESCO recognized capoeira as an intangible world heritage. And according with the organizers, the workshops and classes had great attendance, and the audience was made of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. So these are people at Montreux Square doing the capoeira classes and attending, and not only for Brazilians, but people who are living in this area. Another project involving capoeira was the Capoeira After School project aimed to Irish children. The organizers said that they planning capoeira activities seeking to spread Brazilian culture for children and to reach the image people have from Brazil. According with the instructor, this initiative could be the beginning of a long-term changing in the area, in the city. And he added saying that capoeira is the art of educating through its history. So they didn't know what a slave was until they know capoeira. Another initiative was the International Walk of Portuguese as a heritage language organized by Dublin City Council and with the partnership of the Association of Brazilian Families in Ireland. And this initiative was aiming to spread also Brazilian culture, especially for Irish Brazilian children. Due to COVID, many families were not able to travel to Brazil to visit and to spend time with family for more than 2 years. And according with the organizers, celebrate their living heritage here, it was a way to keep bonding, feel at home, feel with family, and reinforce identity, especially during these hard times. And so here we have also some photos of people, and not only Brazilians, the majority is Brazilians, but practicing classes and celebrating this heritage. Capoeira is also celebrated at the Hill Street Family Resort Center, an intercultural center for families and children based in Dublin's northeast inner city. They seek to promote cultural inclusion through programs in early education, family support, and community education. Here, they held the intercultural family day, and not only with Brazilian culture, but many other cultures with people celebrating this intercultural and multicultural together. Here we have some key finds, key themes drawn from a thematic analysis that we are still working on it with, drawn from the interviews with agents linked with the celebration of this heritage, and we identify some social values. Like cultural diversity, integration, social cultural inclusion, the sense of belonging and pride. And for the interviews, it's important to celebrate their living heritage in Ireland because it's an experience to live the multiculturalism in the city, a cultural diversity beyond Eurocentric culture, a way to feel included culturally in the city, a chance to meet people, to be in a place and to be able to recognize yourself and have access to other cultures as well, not only the Brazilian culture. And here we can see the relevance of public space from these people that are involved with this. I find this very interesting because the last one, even though we are from different nationalities, the challenges, barriers, and problems are the same. So this was a group of women doing the Afro-Brazilian dances, and then the instructor of the classes said that after the classes, she started to notice that women don't want to go back to home, and they wanted and have the need to talk with each other, and they do a circle and share their feelings and thoughts. And so there was a Romanian, there was a Brazilian, there was Polish women, and so this was very interesting. And another, we also identified another cultural activity from Brazil, but the emergence of some grassroots responses like the furrow dancing at Grand Canal Square. I don't know if you are already aware of this, but the organizing of the social dancing, it's a forró instructor in Brazil, a forró teacher in Brazil, and he started to notice that the isolation and social distance during lockdown was affecting many people, including himself. We already know that a large number of people and migrants face a lockdown alone at home, away from family and friends. And so the social dancing was born from the need to connect with people and to take care of mental health and feel closer to home. They choose the Grand Canal Square because it is a central space with easy access, it's free, and according to him, the floor is flat to dance, it's good to do the dance. The weekly social dancing started last summer with a group of 10 people, and now there are around 40 and 50 people dancing every Wednesday. On sunny days, they had around 100 people dancing at the square. They don't have permissions. They try to ask permissions, but they don't get because they can deliver classes. And now there are just but dancing over there. The majority of the attendees are Brazilians, but there are people from other nationalities as well. Over the summer, other rhythms appear in the square, like zouk, street dance, salsa, and the organizers said that they are building communities through these interactions, and all of them have a great convivial, and it's a nice atmosphere. And their motto is everyone is welcome. So for you to know forró, it's a cultural and tradition originally from the Brazil Northeast. It's a merge of dance, of rhythms, a lifestyle, and it's kind of celebrating during festivities, and it's related to the universe of the sertanejo and the rural communities. I don't know how to translate the sertanejo, but it's rural communities, if I can say. So it was recognized as intangible cultural heritage in the national level in Brazil in the last year. And so the organizers, the festival, the forró organizers here are so proud, and they are spreading this, that our dancing is now a cultural heritage, a national cultural heritage for us. So we conducted 40 short interviews, an average of 30 minutes of duration each, in different days with people who attend the social dance. So there are Brazilians aged to 25 to 44 years old, living in Dublin from 5 months until people living here from 12 years. The majority came to Ireland as exchange students, and the majority have the high education background in Brazil and hold diverse occupations here in Ireland. They mostly used to attend forró dancing alone or with friends. They were interviewed about reasons for attending, their engagement with public spaces, and the effects of celebration, their intangible cultural heritage outside their homeland. So we also identified some key themes here, like public spaces, different meanings and integration, casual encounters and build of community. So it's interesting because many of them said that Gran Canaria is now has now a different meaning for them. They usually didn't go to this part of the city, and now they spend more time in this public space. It's an outdoor activity, so important for us Brazilians, because I think for everybody, it's nice to be outdoor when weather helps, and is accessible to everyone. It's easy to know people, to engage with Brazilian community, to build strong connections. And they also have many walk-ins, people who are just passing by or leaving the theater sometimes. And people just drop in, sit, take some photos. Some tourists are doing this as well. And one of the informants say that this is really nice. She feels proud to show her culture in another city, in another country. Here we have other key themes like the sense of belonging, pride, identity. So one say that by coming to Ireland, I thought I would learn more about the world and other cultures, but I've noticed that I'm learning about my own culture, because Brazil, it's huge. And then it was needed to go outside our country to know more about ourselves. So important to remember who we are, identity with the new city, proud of my country, and the question of the issue of the mental health and to engage people, and etc. They have a communication channel is through social media. They are very active and articulating on Instagram, and they inform if dance will happen, where the dance will happen, depending on the weather, where it will be, where is the second option in case they need to move to other place, because a few times Garda approach them, oh, you can live, you can dance here, but oh, you're not doing anything wrong, we're not delivering classes, but you don't have license, you don't have insurance. No, okay, but now you move, and now Garda, it's okay with that. I think they give up, I don't know. But according with the interviews, they are okay with that. The only problem is about the music after 10 p.m. And so they dancing from 7 to 10, and then they stop the music to continue using this space. So As emerging findings, we can say the Brazilian living heritage celebrating Dublin's public spaces have been playing an essential role in integration migrant communities and enable them to take ownership of the city, because the social media and this community is kind of a support, is working as a support as well, a channel with Q&As and, oh, you are a newcomer in the city, you are just arriving, where I open a bank account and how I do this or how I do that. And so they say they are building community because of this. They're establishing relationships, creating boundaries, and building community. We can see that the approach to use the public space is generally top-down. And as Christopher said this morning, grassroots initiatives, which usually don't have permissions, like this case, maybe could have more creative responses. And we should to put together the top-down initiatives and the bottom-up initiatives. So here we saw that top-down initiatives are very relevant, of course, but they are one-time events with shorter duration, mostly in the summer, and events are controlled. And here the grassroots initiatives like the dancing are weekly events with more possibilities to develop lasting effects. And it seems they have more effectivity in the making of place. One challenge pointed by Ben, it's the winter, because they are looking at indoor public space to dance during the winter, and they don't find. So they are trying to approach the authorities and people involved to get this space. So to conclude, emerging findings show that Brazilians' intangible cultural heritage, even being expressed in the new system of values, can be materially and symbolically legitimized outside its original urban fabric. And the celebration of living heritage enhanced public spaces, one that has the potential to break off their hegemonic dynamics and facilitate the expression of migrants' cultural identity. In the face of the challenge to rebuild cities more sustainably post-COVID, migrants and their living heritage can be central to foster cultural inclusion and put the cultural diversity in focus, and not only Brazilian heritage, of course. Emerging findings can be used to develop a cultural mapping. It's our idea of next steps of migrant tangible cultural heritage by tracing, acknowledging, and mapping the intangible cultural assets of migrant communities. Could be possible to make the intangible visible, which could be a powerful instrument to inform better policies on the process of recognition of migrants' intangible cultural heritage and to design more culturally and diverse public spaces. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you firstly to the three. Really different, but really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, to Marcus, the 15-minute cities you mentioned in your presentation. Could you say a little bit more about those? I haven't heard about them. Some concepts.
Yes, it's something I'm still investigating, but I think it's Carlos Moreno researcher that kind of kickstarted it, and it's well, the whole concept, I suppose, is the idea that to make cities more sustainable, that it should be close to everything, to all the infrastructure that you're using in the city, rather than commuting or crossing the city to go to different things, different places. So that everything should be within that 15-minute distance or 15-minute walk. So meaning that you wouldn't need to take your car off, you wouldn't have the stress of commuting. So I suppose that in a sense, it's like a utopian idea, because it's impossible to have that perfect scenario where whenever if you're changing jobs, you can't just say, "Oh, I'm just gonna get a job which is close to my where I live." But the whole idea is to kind of start at least having the basic infrastructure, things such as schools, commerce, things that are sustainable in the sense that you don't need to drive to get there, and also to create a strong sense of community, because if you're close and if you're walking by, then you're meeting more people. Instead of being in a car, which is essentially you're in your own bubble.
Yeah.
So, but an interesting thing, if you look at Dublin, the way that Dublin is developed, even going back to the presentations yesterday, is the fact that you have a sort of that 15-minute city concept already, because you have the little villages, and you even have the signs, if you pay attention to the signs, welcome to Drumcondra, or welcome to Crew, or whatever. So you have that more or less in place, and that's why, a lot of the people that we surveyed, they actually live close to a park, they live close to a local shop where they can buy, bread and milk. But at the same time, it's never going to be a perfect proposition. It's still, like, from my point of view, it's slightly utopian, but it's still worth pursuing. And parks would be an aspect of it to fit into that idea.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for 3 wonderful presentations. Really interesting, and as you say, very different. I was struck by this question of yours, Marcus, about parks and that idea of value for money. And I was thinking about your presentation about culture, and actually also your ideas, Chris, about Robert Owen and actually the economic dimensions of what he was doing. It wasn't just philanthropy, it's profit involved in making these things. And I wonder about that expression, value for money, in a kind of sustainability context as well, and the relevance of all of your ideas, sustainable communities, sustainable cities, and philosophies about cooperation that might be embedded in this. I don't know if any of you have some thoughts to add about that.
I'll give it a go. Just from
That's very badly phrased.
no, just from the perspective of sort of Robert Owen, once he moves into his socialist phase, you might say, simplify a bit, once he leaves economic largely behind, then I think he is really committed to trying to identify ways of sustainable living. That's how you might phrase it today, for ordinary people. I was struck by one of the discussions this morning. I think actually Robert Owen was somebody who believed that the meek could, should, and would inherit the earth. And for his time, that was an incredibly enlightened perspective. And now the movements that he got involved with, all of them kind of failed sooner or later. But at their heart was at least the principle that there should be a method that was a better way of living than contemporary capitalism offered. Whether that was through cooperative producer cooperatives, which he pioneered in the early 1830s, or the consumer cooperative movement, which really sort of took over all these ideas of communal settlements, or indeed the Owenite movement, which in a sense, there's kind of resonance with your presentation, because the Owenites set up these what they call halls of science in places like Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield, and people from all over those cities would go there and have, in a sense, there was a cultural interaction. It was an alternative social and cultural sphere for them, reinforcing their bonds of loyalty and community. So there are lots of interesting connections between those ideas as they were circulating in the first half or so of the 19th century, and the sorts of things we're picking up on your research now, which is about, in a sense, we're continuing to struggle with those challenges, aren't we, of identifying sustainable and meaningful ways of living in modern urban communities.
Yeah, it's difficult to put the value on a park, because it's just it's an open canvas, but there's still, there's maintenance, toilets, all that infrastructure that has to go in there. But it's incredibly, beneficial. But it's, I suppose, one of the key aspects of our report is to actually, point out, that this is great value for money, for well-being, health and well-being of citizens. And during COVID, it was absolutely, essential. It was pretty much the only space where you could actually go and feel well, feel connected, and even meet with people. And I suppose we don't want that to be lost, and I suppose if you look at Robert Owen's trying to do that in those days, probably had a much harder time trying to justify it. But again, even when you look at the way the buildings are, they're kind of looking inward to that lovely courtyard, of the green space inside, and that's an opportunity also. It's a sort of an intangible value that we need to bring to the foreground. So.
There is another aspect in the northeastern city that festivals organizers are afraid that this cultural, this diversity is turned to the exchange value only, and to be stereotyped, and to be the area could be gentrification process, and etc. So they are taking care and go slow with that, because they want to empower the local artists, the artists that are migrants, but they are afraid of this gentrification and the culture as a commodity, the capoeira as a commodity for tourists, and not it's for everyone. So that is approach as well.
Thank you.
Can I ask you about, you referred to kind of like the official UNESCO status of these kind of intangible heritage, intangible heritage dancing, and the images that you have from the Grand Canal are just stunning in a way. It's funny, the lights.
The red stick.
And you can see that, like, I could foresee some problems for, like, obviously when this has to go indoors. And there's one of them that's a specific problem in Ireland, which is the 1935 Dancehall Act as well, which is that you require a license to dance indoors in Ireland. So I wonder if that's kind of another issue that, that is the case. You require a special license to dance inside. So I wonder if that might be a problem. But another thing really is to contrast that image with the image of Mountjoy Square. And the image of Mountjoy Square, which was a really awful, poorly written choice by the council, like, we will have no option but to. It's like what a frustrated parent would say. It's really awful way of putting it. It's like, please note the pandemic or whatever. But as someone who has regularly played soccer in Mountjoy Square with Brazilian and from lots of other, it's interesting that almost like the status there of the cultural activity, and the kind of intercultural activity that could be happening was like kind of quite clearly shut down. The park is shut down, but this other kind of more vague space, but the cultural activity is. It's
just it's what that I'm saying. This top-down initiatives from the CC are the events were very controlled. And for them to use and do the capoeira classes and etc., it was such a long process from the artists and from people involved. Like this, the project with the schools and the intercultural ambassadors were saying about this as well. And they don't. The community is huge. Migrants are a big community, but they don't connect it within them. So this is, I think it's a problem too, because the people from the dancing and the Grand Canal Square don't speak, don't talk with, don't interact with people from capoeira as well, and they are very localized. And I think this will be a problem. So that's why I call the emergent finance, because we are.
But it's also part of, like, okay, so they don't communicate with each other, but also soccer is the one thing. What happened is like, no, shut that down.
Yeah, shut down, and it's okay. And the classes are ending now, and they are asking for more classes, asking for supporting by the CC and etc. But it was just for the reactivation of the public spaces, and now pandemic is over and okay.
Yeah, like an interesting aspect of this is, if you go to any Brazilian cities, like the level of informality is much higher than, in Dublin. So I was just in Brasilia, where my family lives in Brazil for a few weeks, and you have a place where you have food trucks, and so you go out at sunset to go and eat something, and it's totally formal, or you have the little informal food stalls in the parks, and this is something that we are kind of more used to in Brazil. But when you come here, it's suddenly it's just a completely different environment.
Where is the people and the
Yeah.
Because we have the culture of to using the beaches as well. That's a huge public space. So it's different.
And it's fascinating in Brasilia when you look at the city plan and the zoning, that's sort of built into that city and how you experience it. And the informal ways that people live actually, despite or in spite of the zoning.
Yeah. That's actually something I mentioned in my book. If you look at Brasilia from above, you could see what they call the desire lines. So you have all these orthogonal paths that they've designed for pedestrians, and no one uses them. They just go across and make their own way.
And then stay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Sorry to Marcus about parks. Did you find out when people travel to another park, not their local park, was it just the novelty, or was there anything that attracted people? Was there something people said, we went there because it has? Was there any particular amenity that people pointed to? Were the toilets? What was it that drew them to places?
Not necessarily toilets, but sometimes the playgrounds, sometimes more space. But in France, we're still sitting through the days. There's so much space, and it's just. But I think and sometimes it's just a novelty, and it is because I think during COVID, I suppose it's that lack of sensorial input, like that we're just in the same place all the time. We want something different. And I think, that was kind of just far. But it's interesting where I think we're hoping to do another kind of a follow-up survey to kind of see, how things changed. We'll find out more about that.
Chris, can I ask you about kind of the context within which Owen is kind of developing these projects? Because I know there's also type of salt and salt. Is there like a significant philosophical difference between his approach, which you said it kind of comes down to harmony? Yeah. Where but there's still a kind of issue of surveillance and top down.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at those later designs with the towers, we now look at those and think, that looks like a prisoner of war camp, and these these searchlights almost, but so it's difficult, and it's interesting because when I first saw that, I thought, that's like the all-seeing Jeremy Bentham panopticon or something. Bentham was a big supporter of Owen, and Bentham was a shareholder and part of the board of management at New Lanark for a while. So now, I think from Owen's perspective, this was not about surveillance. This was about liberation, but it was kind of thin line between the two. And even at New Lanark, there were issues around inspectors coming round and looking inside people's homes to see how cleanly they were keeping them and stuff like that. So, but in terms of the philosophy, I mean, Owen's philosophy is very rapidly more than that of an enlightened industrialist. So he kind of generalizes to this sort of visionary where he believes he has solved the answers to the world's problems. And he's then going around trying to convert everybody to his point of view and boring them rigid, frankly. But at the same time, he's kind of paradoxical because on the one hand, he's obviously a crank, and yet at the same time, he's an inspirational crank who gets tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people to follow whatever it is that he's championing. So there's a real paradox around Owen, which I kind of think is kind of tremendous, and at the same time, he spent all of his money pursuing these objectives. He ended up effectively being maintained by his children because he'd exhausted his fortune trying to investing in these different these different community ventures, Harmony Hall, effectively. So he is different from, should we say, a Titus Salt in that respect, because he wants to reform the entire world, and he really thinks he knows how to do it.
Was he a Quaker, or was there a
No.
links with the Quakers?
No, he wasn't a Quaker, and he it actually, in 1817, when you saw that Cruikshank image, there were two meetings in the City of London Tavern, and at the second, he surprises a lot of, well, I think he surprises pretty much everybody, because he denounces religion and he denounces Christianity as it is currently practiced. And this puts him beyond the pale almost immediately. And that's one of the reasons why I think he is then ostracized by quite a lot of reformers, because they recognize that as a sort of atheist, as an unbeliever, he's somebody that lots of people cannot accept. And that's one of the reasons why actually some of these community settlements are treated with such hostility by local people, by local ministers of religion. And there's a lot of, sort of scare stories in the local papers about them being centres of free love and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, he's quite a character.
Is there a connection with, Thomas More's Utopia, or did you see a sort of a connection with that?
Yeah, I mean, he's not really a designer of a utopian system in the same way I think that Thomas More would be, but his utopia is very much his ambition for the future of the human race, rather than, I mean, you do have these community designs, but I don't think realistically he worried too much about that. He kind of chucked those ideas out there, but then he was off onto something else, so he's utopian in the sense that his ambition knows no bounds as to the happiness that you thought future that humans could achieve on this earth. So he has an incredibly optimistic view of how it would be possible for people to live together without conflict. So I suppose he ends up getting categorized as a utopian socialist by Marx and Engels, because he doesn't theorize economically the transition from capitalism to socialism. So it's all through, not through political action in those cases, but it's rather through kind of mental transformation.
Why not have another one?
Go for it.
It's for Chris again. It's an architecture question. So harmony, talking about harmony, does that have an aesthetic dimension in terms of the architecture?
That's a really interesting question to which I do not know the answer. So, but it is, I think in terms of the design, I mean, that slide I showed with the enormous building, and where that came from, I honestly don't know. There was an architect, obviously, and the architect, I think, had great plans for what could be achieved, which were totally unrealistic in terms of budget available, So, but I think that's a very interesting question.
There is one aesthetic reference which is in the images and is in the example of Milan, which is William Gilbert, which is the English cleric from the previous century who came up with the concept of picturesque.
Oh yeah.
And so that's kind of happening in the images.
It is.
And you say about near the waterfall.
Yeah.
So there is that, but picturesque is always about making it rough, but that building of harmonious.
Yes.
There's slight kind of differences there, but obviously it's 30, 40 years later.
That's right.
So that's kind of reference point.
Yeah.